The morning sun was soft on the glass walls of the hall. Hundreds of chairs were lined up. Cameras stood tall on tripods. Journalists whispered in corners. Everyone was waiting for the main speaker. It was the first time the Prime Minister of India and the CEO of Google were sharing the stage in such a personal setting. But no one knew what was coming. No one imagined that a single sentence would bring tears to Sundar Pichai's eyes and make the whole room fall silent. Sundar stood, backstage.com but alert. He adjusted his tie and glanced at the script in his hands. His team had prepared every word. He would speak about innovation, AI, the power of India's youth. Everything was carefully timed, but just behind him, someone else was watching too. Lakshmi, Pichai, his mother. She was seated quietly in the front row. No one noticed her at first. She wore a simple cotton sari, her gray hair tied in a neat bun. Her eyes followed Sundar with a kind of warmth only a mother could carry. She wasn't used to the flashing lights or the buzzing microphones, but she had come because Sundar had asked her. He had whispered to her that morning, "Amma, it would mean the world to me if you're there." The crowd began to clap as the Prime Minister entered. Narendra Modi stepped forward, smiling, confident. He greeted the audience and shook Sundar's hand. Cameras clicked rapidly. The event began as planned. Sundar delivered his speech, smooth and humble. People nodded. Some took notes. It was all going well. But then, the Prime Minister took the mic, and everything changed. He looked at the audience for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "Before I speak about technology, allow me to speak about struggle. Not mine, not India's, but a boy's. A boy who waited every Sunday for his father to come home with one bottle of cold drink because they could not afford more. A boy who walked miles under the sun just to catch a glimpse of a computer. A boy whose house had no fridge, no TV, and yet he dreamed big." There was a pause. "That boy is standing beside me today, and his name is Sundar Pichai." The hall went silent. No one moved, not even the cameras. Sundar froze. He hadn't expected this. This wasn't in the script. His heart raced. His eyes found his mother in the front row. Her hand covered her mouth. Tears welled up in her eyes. Prime Minister Modi continued, his voice calm but powerful. "We celebrate success too often without remembering the path that led to it. But today, we remember. We honor a mother who stitched torn clothes again and again so her son could wear clean ones to school. We honor a father who worked overtime so he could buy his son one science magazine every month. This is the real India, and that is why Sundar Pichai is not just a CEO. He is a symbol." The applause broke like thunder. Some stood up, others reached for tissues. Sundar looked down. He had no words. For a man who built his life around ideas and innovation, for once, he was silent. And in that silence, 1,000 stories echoed, because behind every success, there is often a struggle so deep, so hidden, that even the world's brightest minds forget where they came from. That night, Sundar sat with his mother in the quiet of their hotel room. No cameras, no stage, just the two of them. He looked at her hands, worn from years of housework, and whispered, "Oma, I thought people forgot." But he didn't. She smiled. "No one forgets the roots, Kenna. Sometimes the world just needs to be reminded." Outside the window, Delhi's lights blinked like stars, but inside, in that little room, sat a man who had everything and still felt like a little boy again, and that was only the beginning. It was the next morning. The headlines had already spread across newspapers and news channels. Modi honors Sundar Pichai's struggles. The story behind the CEO's rise. Mother of Google chief receives emotional praise. But while the media rushed to share every word spoken on stage, Sundar stayed silent. Not because he didn't want to speak, but because something inside him had shifted. His past, which he had kept so private for so long, was now in the spotlight. He sat by the hotel window, looking out at the city he had once called home. It had changed. The streets were wider, the buildings taller, but the smell of chai, the sound of bicycle bells, the call of the vegetable seller from the corner, all of it pulled him back to the small two-room house in Chennai. Lakshmi walked into the room quietly. She held a cup of coffee for him. "Drink, Kanna," she said softly. Sundar took the cup, but didn't sip right away. His voice was low. "Amma, when he spoke about us yesterday, I didn't know how to feel." She sat beside him. "You were surprised," she said. "So was I." He looked at her, searching for something. "Did I forget my roots, Soma? Did I become so busy that I never looked back?" Lakshmi shook her head. She placed her hand on his dot. Double quotes. "No, you didn't forget. You just carried the weight alone." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sundar said, "I remembered something. Last night. Do you recall that one night when the power went out and I had an exam?" Lakshmi smiled. "You studied with a candle, and when it burned out, you kept going in the dark." Sundar nodded. "I think that was the moment I decided I had to leave. Not because I didn't love home, but because I wanted more." He stood up and walked to his suitcase. He pulled out a brown envelope. Inside was an old photograph. Two boys. One of them was Sundar. The other was his friend Arjun. They were about 12 years old, standing outside a rundown internet cafe. "We couldn't afford the internet," Sundar said, "but Arjun's brother let us stand outside the window and watch him use it." "I remember," Lakshmi said. "Arjun, he used to come over for this." Sundar's expression turned serious. "I haven't spoken to him in over 20 years. He was brilliant, smarter than me, even. But his father got sick. He had to leave school and work at the factory." I went on. "He stayed behind." Lakshmi was quiet. "What if he had my chance?" Sundar whispered. "What if the only difference between me and him was luck?" That question stayed with him all day. Later that afternoon, he asked his team to cancel his meetings. Instead, he asked for a car and a name. "Arjun Ramesh," he said. "Find him." No one questioned him. Within hours, they had a location. A small apartment in Chennai. Sundar didn't tell anyone else. Not the press. Not the security detail. Just his driver and his mother. As the car drove through the narrow lanes of his old neighborhood, Sundar stared out the window. The old temple was still there. The tea stall, now run by the son of the man who served them years ago, waved at the car without knowing who sat inside. The car stopped near a modest building. Sundar stepped out. His mother followed. He took a deep breath, then knocked on the door. It opened slowly. A man in a faded shirt looked at them, confused at first. Then his eyes widened. He stepped back. "Sundar," he said, almost in disbelief. "Arjun," Sundar said, his voice full of emotion. "It's been a long time." Tears formed in Arjun's eyes. You came back." The two men hugged tightly. It wasn't just a greeting. It was years of silence, broken in a single moment. Lakshmi smiled behind them. The door stayed open. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, whispering in shock. Arjun's wife brought water and snacks. His two children peeped shyly from behind the door. Sundar sat on the old wooden chair and looked around. The walls were bare, but clean. The air smelled like home. "You became a legend," Arjun said. "We watched every news piece. My kids know your name better than any actor. You should be there too," Sundar said softly. "You had everything. You were the best coder I ever met." Arjun laughed, but it was hollow. "Life had other plans. My father fell sick. I started working. Dreams faded." Sundar grew quiet. What if they didn't have to? He took out a small notebook. Inside it was a plan, an idea he had been thinking about for months. "What if we created something together?" Sundar said. "For children like us. Kids with no access, no money, but full of fire." Arjun stared at him. "You're serious?" "More than ever." And in that small room, something began. Not a company, not a speech, but a promise. The world would soon hear about it. But for now, two old friends just sat there, catching up, laughing like boys again, and Lakshmi. She watched them both, and she knew this was only the beginning of something bigger than both of them. A week had passed since Sundar visited Arjun. The moment had changed something deep inside him. The world was still buzzing about the speech with Prime Minister Modi, but Sundar's mind was focused elsewhere. He was no longer thinking about the applause or the headlines. He was thinking about something bigger, something that could change the lives of thousands of children who were just like him and Arjun once were, back in California. Sundar sat at his desk late into the night. The Google campus was quiet. His team had gone home. Outside, the city lights blinked in the distance. But inside his office, he was sketching out something that had nothing to do with search engines or artificial intelligence. He called it Project Udaan, a simple name. Udaan meant flight in Hindi. And that was exactly what he wanted to give wings to kids who were still grounded by poverty, by lack of access, by a life that gave them only limited options. The idea was to build a digital learning platform in India's smaller towns and villages. Not just online lessons, but real mentorship, real faces, real people like Arjun who had lived that life and could speak with honesty. Sundar wanted to make sure every child with curiosity could see what was possible even if they had no computer, no money, and no support. He picked up his phone and called Arjun. "Are you ready?" Sundar asked. "I've been waiting my whole life for this," Arjun replied. The two of them started working quietly. Sundar didn't make a big announcement. He wanted the plan to grow roots first, before it grew wings. Arjun began gathering names, young talents from across Tamil Nadu, who had dropped out of school or never had the chance to enter one. "We'll start with 50, Sundar said. 50 children. Then we grow." Each child would be given a tablet, solar-powered, offline-friendly, filled with curated content in their local language. But more than the device, they would get a mentor, a real person, someone to call, someone who would answer when they had a question. The plan was simple. Hope was the foundation. Meanwhile, in Delhi, the Prime Minister's office had taken notice. Narendra Modi had seen the viral photos of Sundar and Arjun together. He was curious. He called his secretary and said, "Find out what they're planning. I want to help." Days later, Sundar received an unexpected call from the office of the Prime Minister. "Sir," the voice said, "the PM would like to meet you and your friend again. Not in public, in private." Sundar agreed. They flew back to Delhi. This time, no cameras followed them. It was a quiet visit, only a few guards at the gate. Modi welcomed them with warmth. "I saw the pictures," he said. "Two boys who beat the odds. And now they're building a road for others." Arjun smiled shyly. He wasn't used to such attention. Modi turned to him. "You're not in the shadows anymore, Arjun. I see you." Those words stayed with him. They discussed Project Udaan for over an hour. Modi listened carefully, asked questions, and finally said, "Let's not wait. The government will support this. Every school without electricity, every child without a device will start there." Arjun looked stunned. Sundar was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you, sir. But I have one request. No banners. No big events. This is for the children, not for the cameras." Modi nodded. Done. The next phase began faster than anyone expected. Within 3 weeks, the first batch of 50 children were selected from different villages, some from the hills of Uttarakhand, others from the dry plains of Rajasthan. Sundar visited some of the families himself. When he arrived, they didn't recognize him as the Google CEO. To them, he was just a man in a simple shirt, asking about their children's dreams. One boy, barely 10, said he wanted to be an astronaut. A girl with large eyes and quiet strength said she wanted to become a teacher, and Sundar wrote their names down, one by one, with a promise: "Soon, Packages began arriving, not with expensive gifts, but with tablets, earphones, solar chargers, and a handwritten note from Sundar. The note read, "Dear student, this is not a gift. This is your mirror. When you look at the screen, see yourself, because everything you dream is real." Within a month, the pilot program had started. The children began learning every evening after their chores were done. They spoke to mentors once a week. They had tests, assignments, games, and stories that felt like home. Arjun became one of the main voices of the project. His soft-spoken nature, his honesty, his journey, they inspired the children. Many of them said, "He's like us." And Sundar, he watched silently from behind. He didn't want praise. He didn't want awards. He only wanted change. Meanwhile, one evening, as Sundar walked down a dusty path in one of the villages, a small girl ran up to him. She held the tablet close to her chest and said, "Sir, will this help me reach the moon?" He kneeled down, looked into her eyes, and replied, "Only if you promise to teach others once you get there." She nodded seriously, and just like that, a fire lit in her heart. That night, as Sundar and Arjun sat under the stars, eating from steel plates and listening to the laughter of children, Arjun said, "We used to chase dreams with empty pockets." Sundar smiled, "And now we're filling pockets with dreams." The journey had just begun, and the world was about to witness something far more powerful than a speech or a title. They were going to witness hope rising quietly from the ground up. The monsoon rains had come early that year. Soft drops hit the roof of a village school as 20 children sat inside, each with a glowing screen in front of them. Their eyes lit up as they tapped, scrolled, and asked questions out loud. Some of them had never touched a device before. Some had never even held a pen properly. But now, they were coding small games, reading about the solar system, and learning English with a joy that no textbook had ever given them. Project Udon was no longer just an idea. It had become a movement. The news had begun to spread quietly. No billboards, no speeches, just word of mouth. One village told the next. One teacher called another. Schools that had once echoed with silence now echoed with the voices of curious children. And behind it all stood two men, Sundar Pichai and Arjun Ramesh. But as the project grew, so did the challenges. One afternoon, a call came in. A group of children in a remote village in Bihar were being told not to use the devices. "They don't need screens," said a local leader. "They need to work. We don't want them getting ideas." The words hit hard. Sundar sat in his California office, staring at the message. He could feel the weight of it. This wasn't just about education. It was about mindset, about fear, about control. He called Arjun. "We need to go there," Sundar said. "To Bihar." Arjun asked, "It's dangerous. They're not happy with outsiders." "Then we won't go as outsiders," Sundar replied. "We'll go as listeners." Within days, they landed in Patna and drove 6 hours into the countryside. The roads were broken. The villages were quiet. When they arrived, the children had been stopped from attending sessions. Their tablets were locked away in a storage room. Sundar and Arjun didn't speak to the officials first. They went to the families. They sat on mats. They drank chai. They listened. One mother said, "My daughter wakes up early just to use the device. But now they say she must wash clothes instead." Another said, "My son wants to be a scientist." They laugh at him. Arjun took notes. Sundar said nothing for a long time. Then he asked, "If we held a gathering, a small one, in the school ground, would you come?" The mothers looked at each other. One of them nodded. That evening, as the sun set, dozens gathered under a tree near the school. Sundar stood before them, not as a CEO, but as a boy who once stood where they were. "When I was your son's age," he began, "I wanted to study, but we had no money, no internet, sometimes no food. But I had a mother who believed I could do more. He looked around. Your children are not dreaming too big. They are dreaming just enough. Enough to lift their families. Enough to lift this village. The silence was deep. Then came soft clapping. Then louder. Then cheers. The local leader, who had opposed the program, stepped forward. He looked at Sundar, then said, "We were wrong. We feared change. But maybe change is what we need." The tablets were returned that same night. The children danced with joy, and once again, the quiet spark of hope returned. Back in Delhi, news of the turnaround reached the Prime Minister's office. Modi smiled when he heard the story. They did not fight, he said. They listened. And that was the secret of Project UDAN. It didn't force itself on people. It grew with them. By the end of the month, over 20 more villages had signed up. The wait list grew. But Sundar remained focused on one thing: quality over numbers. He called a meeting with global tech leaders. It wasn't about investment. It was about responsibility. "We always talk about the next big thing," Sundar said. "But sometimes, the next big thing is giving the smallest child a reason to wake up excited." Many nodded. Some offered help. Google agreed to donate more tablets. A major internet provider offered free connectivity to the villages, and in a quiet moment, Arjun turned to Sundar and said, "Can you believe this?" Sundar looked at him, double quotes, "No, but I can feel it. And that's enough." Meanwhile, something else was brewing in the background. An award committee had nominated Sundar for a prestigious international prize for global humanitarian work. But Sundar hesitated. He had always avoided the spotlight for his charity work. Yet this time, there was a twist. The committee didn't just want to honor him. They wanted to honor Arjun too. When Arjun heard, he was stunned. "Me? Why?" Sundar smiled. "Because the world is finally seeing what I saw years ago." The ceremony was to be held in London. Sundar flew with Arjun and Lakshmi. It was her first time leaving India. When they stepped into the hall, the applause was thunderous. Leaders from around the world stood to greet them. But as Sundar took the stage, he turned to Arjun and handed him the mic. Arjun stood there, shaking, nervous. Then he looked up and said, "I never thought I'd stand here, but I'm not here because I'm great. I'm here because someone believed I still had something to give." He paused. "If you are watching this, and you feel like life has forgotten you, just wait. Your story isn't over yet." The room fell silent, and then applause. Not for a CEO, not for a politician, but for a man who once stood outside an internet cafe, watching through the glass and now stood on the world's biggest stage. Backstage, Sundar hugged Arjun tightly. "You spoke from the heart," he said. Arjun whispered, "because I finally believe in it again." And far from that hall, in a dusty village classroom, a girl watched the ceremony on her tablet. Her eyes filled with wonder, because now, she too believed that dreams were not just for others, they were for her. The days after the London ceremony felt like a new chapter. Suddenly, people across the world began to ask one simple question: what is Project UDAN? Sundar's email flooded with messages from educators, doctors, engineers, and ordinary people who wanted to help. They didn't want to just donate money. They wanted to be mentors, to teach, to guide. Everyone felt inspired by the story of two childhood friends, one who reached the stars, and one who stayed grounded, only to rise later through the power of second chances. But with attention came pressure. One afternoon, Sundar was in a meeting when he received an urgent message from Arjun. He had just returned from a school visit in Madhya Pradesh. "We have a problem," Arjun said on the call. "The children are excited. The teachers are willing. But there's something else." Sundar asked, "What's wrong?" "The community is scared again," Arjun replied. "Not of us, but of what this learning might bring. They're worried that children will dream too big and then get disappointed." The words sat heavy in the air. Sundar leaned back in his chair. He knew that kind of fear. He had seen it in his neighbors long ago. When you grow up with nothing, hope sometimes feels like a risk you can't afford, so he decided to go there himself. He arrived quietly, without the media, just Sundar, Arjun, and 2 staff members. They walked into a community hall, where the elders had gathered. An old man stood up and said, "We respect what you're doing, but these are our children. If they study too much, they will leave. They will forget who we are." Sundar listened. He didn't interrupt. Then he spoke, slowly and gently. "I didn't forget my mother," he said. "I didn't forget my street. I still remember the shop that sold me my first pencil. I didn't leave to escape. I left to return stronger." He looked at them. "Every child here can do that too. They will not forget their roots. They will make the roots stronger." One woman stood up and asked, "And what if they fail?" Sundar paused. "Then we teach them that failure is not the end. We lift them again. That's our job as elders, as mentors, as a community." There was a long silence then. One by one, heads began to nod. Finally, the old man who had spoken first smiled and said, "Maybe it's time we stop fearing the sky." That evening, children gathered under the open sky, listening to Arjun as he told them stories, not from books, but from life. He spoke about the days when he wanted to give up, and how Sundar's return reminded him that it's never too late to start again. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. Lakshmi Pichai, Sundar's mother, who had stayed mostly in the background, began visiting the learning centers with him. She didn't speak much at first, but slowly, she started telling her own story. One day, in a village in Maharashtra, she sat in a circle with a group of mothers. Some were shy, some were unsure. Lakshmi smiled gently and said, "I once had to decide whether to buy rice or buy a notebook for my son. I chose the notebook." They all leaned in. "Today, he gives notebooks to thousands. But I still remember the taste of that watery doll we had that night, and I would make the same choice again." The mothers listened, eyes wide and full of respect. "Your sacrifices matter," Lakshmi said. "Don't let anyone tell you they don't." News of her small talks began to spread. They called her Oma of Dreams. And soon, wherever she went, mothers came forward. They cried, they shared, they believed. Sundar noticed the change. "Amma," he said one day, "you've become the voice of Project Udaan." She laughed softly. "I'm just telling the truth, Kanna, that's all." In the middle of all this, something else began to stir. A group of college students from Delhi reached out. They had created a prototype of a low-cost device for offline learning. They called it Jyoti Light. Sundar met them in a quiet cafe. "Why did you name it Jyoti?" he asked. One of the girls replied, "Because we think learning is the light that never fades." Sundar smiled. "How would you like to partner with Project Udaan?" Their faces lit up, and just like that, another door opened. Project Udaan wasn't just helping students anymore. It was inspiring young adults to build new tools, new paths, and new futures. But just as things seemed to be rising beautifully, a challenge came from the most unexpected place. A major company, known for its expensive digital learning platform, sent a legal notice. They claimed Project Udaan was disrupting market space unfairly by offering free services. Sundar looked at the letter and shook his head. "They're scared," Arjun said. "Yes," Sundar replied, "but not of us. They're scared of something they can't control. Kindness." Sundar's legal team responded strongly, reminding them that education was not a product, but a right. The story made the news, and people stood with Project Udaan. A movement had truly begun. The story of Sundar and Arjun was now being taught in classrooms, not as a tale of success, but as a lesson in humility, resilience, and friendship. One night, as Sundar walked alone in a village under the stars, he saw a boy sitting outside with a tablet. The boy was barefoot, his shirt was torn, but his eyes were filled with focus. Sundar asked, "What are you learning?" The boy didn't look up. How to build an app, he said. What kind of app? One that helps my mother sell her vegetables online. Sundar felt his throat tighten. He patted the boy's head and walked away, his heart full. Later he told Arjun, this is why we do it. Not for awards, not for applause, for that boy, and the mother who will sleep easier tomorrow. And Arjun said, then let's never stop. And they didn't. The sky over Delhi was painted gold and orange as the sun began to set. Another school year was ending. For most people, it was just another evening, but for Sundar Pichai and Arjun Ramesh, this evening marked a quiet, powerful milestone. 1,000,000 children had now passed through Project UDAAN. No lights, no stage, no grand celebration, just a small gathering in a rural school courtyard, where children sat barefoot on rugs, holding their tablets, and waiting to meet the two men who had changed their lives. As Sundar stepped forward, he looked around, at the young faces staring back at him. Some smiled, some looked nervous. One girl in the front row raised her hand. Sir, she said, can we ask questions? Of course, Sundar replied, kneeling down to her level. The questions came fast. Were you scared as a child? What happens when you fail? Do you still get nervous when you speak? Sundar listened to every question. He didn't give fancy answers. Yes, he said. I was scared. Yes, I failed many times. Yes, even now, my hands shake before a big speech. The children leaned in. They had always imagined people like him to be perfect. But here, he was honest, humble, and human then the same. Girl asked, what kept you going? Sundar looked at her and smiled. My mother, he said, and one old friend who believed in me when I almost forgot how to believe in myself. Arjun stood beside him, nodding quietly. The moment was gentle, but powerful. It wasn't about titles or fame. It was about something deeper. Connection. As the session ended, the children stood in a line. One by one, they handed Sundar and Arjun thank you cards, handmade with crayons and small drawings. One card read, thank you for showing me I matter. Another said, you are the reason I smile in school. Now one boy simply wrote, one day I will be like you. Sundar folded the cards carefully, placing them in his bag. I'll keep them always, he said. That night, under the stars, he and Arjun sat on a stone bench, their backs resting against a neem tree. Lakshmi joined them, holding 2 steel cups of chai. Do you know, she said, when Sundar was small, he used to look at the night sky and ask, Amma, do stars talk to each other? Arjun chuckled. Maybe they do now, just like we're talking. Sundar smiled, taking a sip. Maybe we were always meant to meet again. To finish what we started, they sat in silence for a while, letting the night carry their thoughts. But the journey wasn't over. The next morning, news arrived. The United Nations had invited Sundar, Arjun, and Lakshmi to speak at a global summit on education and equality. The invitation wasn't just symbolic. The world wanted to know how a local dream in a narrow Chennai street had become a worldwide movement. At the summit in New York, the hall was packed. World leaders, educators, and youth ambassadors filled the room. Lakshmi, wearing her simple sari, sat beside her son and Arjun. When it was time, Sundar walked to the podium. He looked over the crowd and began. I come to you today not as a CEO, but as a student of life, of struggle, of hope. He paused, then turned to his mother and nodded. This is Lakshmi, my first teacher. Then he pointed to Arjun. This is my friend, the one who never gave up, even when the world stopped looking. He continued, we all talk about the future, but the future isn't a gadget. It's not a new app. It's that girl in a small village who just learned to write her name. It's that boy who now knows he's allowed to ask questions. Applause echoed through the room. Sundar wasn't reading from a paper. He was speaking from the heart. If we don't reach the forgotten child, he said, then our progress is incomplete. We can go to Mars, but if a boy on Earth can't go to school, we have failed. As he ended, he said one final thing. Change does not come from power. It comes from kindness. The hall stood in a long ovation. Lakshmi wiped her eyes. Arjun gripped the edge of his seat. The world had finally understood. After the summit, dozens of countries reached out. They wanted to bring Project Udaan to their own rural areas, their own underserved communities, and Sundar agreed on one condition. We will not sell this, he said. We will share it. A year later, Project Udaan had spread across Africa, Southeast Asia, and even parts of South America. Millions of children, once invisible, were now learning, laughing, dreaming. In a small classroom in Kenya, a child held a GOT tablet and whispered, "I want to be a doctor." In a mountain village in Peru, a girl watched Lakshmi's video and told her mother, "You are my Amma of dreams too." And in Chennai, Sundar stood outside his old house. It was still there, still modest, still home. A neighbor saw him and said, "Your mother used to buy one banana and share it between you and your brother." Sundar smiled. "Yes, and she gave us both a full stomach and a full heart." He walked to the door, placed his hand on the wall, and whispered, "Thank you," because he knew that everything began here. A small home, a kind mother, a best friend, and a boy with a dream today. That dream had turned into a light for millions, and the world was better because of it. Years had passed since that unforgettable day on stage, when the Prime Minister honored Sundar Pichai's humble roots and awakened a story the world would never forget. Now, in this final chapter, the story circles back. It's no longer about success, or technology, or fame. It's about coming home. Sundar was standing in a quiet hospital room in Chennai. His mother, Lakshmi, now older and a little more fragile, rested on a bed beside the window. The doctors said she was stable, just tired. Her heart was slowing down with age. Nothing urgent, but enough to bring him home. He sat beside her, holding her hand. "Remember when I had the flu and you sat up all night?" Sundar asked softly. She smiled faintly. "Yes, and you kept crying for hot rasam." They both chuckled. Then she whispered, "You've made the world proud, Kanna." He shook his head. "No, Oma, you did. I just followed the map you gave me." On the table beside her bed was a worn copy of one of the thank you cards she had received during her visits to the learning centers. It read, "Dear Lakshmi Oma, I want to be a mother like you one day." That one note had meant more to her than any medal or award. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Arjun was speaking at a small community center. He stood before 20 young boys, most of them from poor families. They were being trained in digital repair and coding basics. Arjun told them stories from his childhood. He showed them how to fix a broken port. But more than that, he told them what Sundar had told him years ago. You're not too late, and you're not too small. Outside, the world continued to change. Project Udaan had now reached over 30 countries. The United Nations had officially declared it the most impactful educational movement of the decade. But back in India, Sundar was thinking about legacy, not the one written in newspapers, but the one written in lives. He had an idea. He called Arjun and said, "What if we built something permanent, something that stands even after we're gone?" "You mean like a school?" Arjun asked. "No," Sundar replied. "A place where mothers, fathers, children all can learn together. A space where no one is too young or too old to dream." Arjun paused. "I'm in." They called it the Udaan Center for Lifelong Learning. The first one was built in Tamil Nadu, just outside the neighborhood where Sundar grew up. Lakshmi laid the first stone. It was a small building, painted in bright colors, with open windows and a garden of native flowers. No gates, no uniforms, just open arms. The walls inside had paintings from children across India, some from villages, others from urban slums. The library was filled with books in every language. There were computers, tablets, solar panels, and most importantly, people kind, patient people, ready to teach and learn together. Lakshmi visited every weekend. She sat with the mothers. She helped cook lunch for the kids. They called her Uma of the campus, and Sundar he didn't need to be present every day, because the seeds he had planted were now trees. One day, a young girl walked up to the wall of the center, where a quote was painted in blue letters. Dreams are not distant. They are waiting. You just need to walk toward them. She asked her teacher, "Who said this?" The teacher replied, "A boy who once walked miles to school, and now walks the world. His name is Sundar Pichai." The girl looked at the name, then whispered, "One day, they'll write my name too." And that was the real success. Not Google, not speeches, not awards, but belief. But belief passed from one hand to another, from a mother to a son, from a friend to a friend, from a CEO to a child. Sundar stood at the back of that center on a quiet evening, watching children play, watching parents learn, watching dreams unfold. Arjun came and stood beside him. "You think this will last?" he asked. Sundar smiled. "Only if they keep passing it forward." Just then, a boy ran up to them. He held a notebook, eyes full of energy. "Double quotes, sir. Can you check my code?" he asked. Sundar took the notebook, looked it over, and said, "This is better than what I wrote at your age." The boy beamed, then ran back inside. Arjun turned to Sundar. "You were that boy once." "Yes," Sundar said, "and someone saw me." He looked up at the sky. "Now we see them." The sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the playground. The Udon flag flew gently in the breeze, its symbol of flight now etched into history, and somewhere deep in that golden light, the words echoed once more: "Dreams are not distant. They are waiting. You just need to walk toward them." This was the story of Sundar Pichai, but more than that, this was the story of belief. A belief that no matter where you start, you can rise, and once you do, reach back and lift someone else.